Victoria sat at the dining table, staring at the empty chair across from her. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, a constant reminder that Ethan was late, again. It had become a routine she no longer questioned. The long hours at the office, the last-minute business trips, the exhausted conversations over takeout meals, it was their new normal. She used to ask him about his day, used to press for details about what kept him so occupied. Now, she barely had the energy to pretend she cared. Their conversations had boiled down to the essentials: schedules, bills, the occasional polite inquiry about each other's well-being. But there were no lingering touches, no inside jokes, no whispered confessions in the dark. Victoria ran her fingers along the rim of her wine glass, a bitter smile playing on her lips. When had she started drinking alone? She glanced at her reflection in the window, still beautiful, still vibrant, yet invisible in her own home. A dull ache settled in her chest. She wasn't asking for grand gestures or sweeping romance, just something to remind her she was still wanted. But as the hours stretched on and the silence deepened, she realized she had never felt lonelier. The day Nate moved in, Victoria barely noticed. Ethan had mentioned it in passing. His son from his first marriage needed a place to stay while he figured out his next steps. She had nodded absent-mindedly, too caught up in her own thoughts to give it much weight. But when Nate actually arrived, bags in hand, his presence shifted something in the house. He wasn't a stranger. She had met him at family events, exchanged pleasantries over holiday dinners, but this was different. Now, he was here, a permanent fixture in her world, and she wasn't sure what to make of it. At first, their interactions were polite but distant. He kept to himself, spending hours in his room or working at the kitchen counter with his headphones in. But Victoria started noticing things. The way he always offered to help clear the table after dinner. How he listened intently when she spoke. How he actually saw her in a way Ethan hadn't in years. One evening, as she poured herself a glass of wine, she caught Nate watching her from across the kitchen. His gaze wasn't intrusive, but it lingered, curious, searching. A flicker of something she couldn't quite name passed between them, unsettling and electric. Leo's arrival was a whirlwind. Unlike Nate, who carried an air of quiet contemplation, Leo was all energy, bold, charismatic, impossible to ignore. He swept into the house with easy confidence, throwing his bag onto the couch like he had always belonged there. His laughter filled the rooms. His playful sarcasm broke through even Victoria's well-worn walls. He had a way of making everything feel lighter, even the tension she had been carrying for years. At dinner that first night, Leo turned his attention to her. "So, Victoria," he said with a grin, leaning forward on his elbows, "what do you do for fun?" She blinked at him, thrown off by the directness of his question. Ethan never asked things like that anymore. She hesitated before answering, suddenly self-conscious. I used to paint," she admitted, surprising even herself with the confession. She hadn't picked up a brush in years. Leo's expression shifted, intrigued. "Used to?" he echoed. "What happened?" Her lips parted, but no words came. She wasn't sure what had happened. Life? Responsibility? Loneliness? She didn't have an answer. But as she met Leo's expectant gaze, she had the strangest feeling that he saw more of her than she had allowed anyone to in a very long time. That evening, Victoria found herself alone in the kitchen, washing dishes in silence while the distant hum of Nate and Leo's voices carried from the living room. She had always enjoyed the quiet moments after dinner, the rhythmic motion of her hands in the warm water, the simple act of cleaning up, routine, predictable, safe. But tonight, she felt restless. She glanced over her shoulder, catching a glimpse of Leo leaning back on the couch, his arm casually draped over the backrest as he laughed at something Nate said. His presence had shifted the energy in the house, disrupting the stillness she had grown accustomed to. And yet, she didn't mind. "Need help?" His voice startled her. She turned to find him standing in the doorway, watching her with that signature smirk. "I've got it," she replied quickly, but he was already beside her, rolling up his sleeves. He grabbed a dish towel and leaned in just enough to make her pulse quicken. "Come on, Victoria," he teased. "Live a little. Let someone else do the drying for once." She opened her mouth to argue, but for some reason, she let out a soft laugh instead. Maybe, just maybe, She didn't mind the change after all. The house felt different when Victoria was alone with Nate. The usual tension that hummed beneath the surface softened into something quieter. Something unspoken yet heavy with meaning. She sat on the back porch, the evening breeze cool against her skin. As she watched the distant city lights flicker in the darkness, Nate was beside her, a glass of wine in his hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I never thought I'd end up here," he admitted, his voice low and thoughtful. "Not just in this house, but everything. Life didn't exactly go the way I planned." Victoria turned to him, searching his face. In the dim light, he looked almost vulnerable, stripped of the casual confidence he usually carried. "I don't think anyone's life turns out the way they expect," she murmured. He glanced at her then, holding her gaze for a moment too long. "You ever think about starting over?" The question sent a ripple through her. She did, more than she cared to admit. But before she could answer, Nate reached out, his fingers barely brushing against hers on the railing. It was fleeting, hesitant, yet it sent a rush of warmth through her, one that she wasn't sure she was ready to name. The night air was thick with unspoken words, the silence between Victoria and Nate stretching longer than it should have. She wasn't sure how they ended up here, alone again, lingering in the dimly lit kitchen after the others had gone to bed. The remnants of dinner sat on the counter, an empty wine bottle between them. She leaned against the sink, arms crossed, watching as Nate rinsed his glass, his movements slow, deliberate, almost too controlled. "You're quiet tonight," she finally said, breaking the silence. He glanced at her, his lips curving into a faint, unreadable smile. "Just thinking." "About?" For a moment, he didn't answer. He dried his hands, then turned, resting against the counter opposite her. "About you," he said finally, his voice low, careful. Victoria's breath hitched, the air shifted, something unspoken settling between them. She should look away, change the subject, laugh it off, but she didn't. Instead, she held his gaze, her pulse betraying her. "Nate," she started, but he stepped closer, just enough for her to feel the warmth radiating from him. "Tell me to stop," he murmured. She opened her mouth, but no words came, and that silence spoke louder than any answer she could give. The evening stretched on, the quiet hum of the city outside barely breaking through the weight of the moment. Victoria sat on the couch, knees tucked under her, watching as Leo paced the room, his usual playfulness absent. He had been different lately, guarded in a way that made her chest tighten. "You're avoiding me," she said softly, testing the waters. Leo paused mid-step, running a hand through his dark hair. "I'm not," he said, though the hesitation in his voice told a different story. She tilted her head, studying him. "Then what is it?" He exhaled sharply, as if weighing the risk of his next words. "I don't know how to be around you anymore," he admitted, his voice raw. "Not when everything feels different." The words struck her harder than she expected. She had felt it too, the shift, the unspoken tension lingering between them in stolen glances and hesitant touches. "Leo," she whispered, standing, "you're overthinking this." "Am I?" He stepped closer, eyes dark with something she wasn't sure she was ready to name. "Because every time I look at you, I feel like I'm already in too deep." And just like that, the space between them disappeared. The night air was thick with something unspoken, a tension that neither Victoria nor Nate had the courage to name. The dim light from the kitchen cast soft shadows across his face as he leaned against the counter, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly against his glass. "You've been different," Nate murmured, his gaze meeting hers in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. Victoria hesitated, gripping the edge of the table. "And what if I have?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. His jaw tightened. "Then I want to know why." She exhaled, forcing herself to hold his gaze. "Maybe because I don't know where this is going," she admitted. "Maybe because I don't know if I should want it to go anywhere." Nate's eyes darkened, and he took a slow step forward. "But you do," he said, his voice low, certain. "You wouldn't be here if you didn't." She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words press against something deep inside her. The distance between them was nearly non-existent now, the pull undeniable. She knew she should step away, But instead, she let herself stay, caught in the gravity of a moment she wasn't sure she wanted to escape. The house was quiet, the only sound the soft hum of the clock on the wall. Victoria sat at the edge of the couch, her fingers gripping her wine glass a little too tightly. Across from her, Nate and Leo sat in a silence that was anything but comfortable. It was the kind of silence filled with unspoken things, with words hovering just at the edge of their lips but never quite making it out. Leo exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Are we really going to pretend like nothing is happening here? His voice was steady, but there was something raw underneath it. Victoria's breath hitched, but she didn't look away. What do you want me to say? She asked, her voice softer than she intended. Nate leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. We don't want you to say anything you don't mean, he murmured, but we also don't want to keep pretending. Her pulse quickened. She had spent weeks trying to suppress what was growing between them. But now, with the weight of their eyes on her, she realized something terrifying. She didn't want to pretend either. Not anymore. The morning light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the quiet room. Victoria sat up slowly, her heartbeat steady but her mind racing. Last night had changed everything. She glanced at Nate and Leo, both still asleep, their breathing slow and even. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning in loneliness. Instead, there was a sense of belonging, an undeniable connection she had never anticipated but could no longer ignore. Slipping out of bed, she wrapped herself in a robe and walked to the window, her fingers grazing the cool glass. The world outside remained the same, routine, structured, predictable, but inside, everything had shifted. She had stepped into something uncertain, something exhilarating, something forbidden. A part of her knew that what had happened last night couldn't remain hidden forever. Sooner or later, reality would come crashing down. But as she turned back, watching the rise and fall of Nate's chest, the way Leo's arm stretched slightly toward her even in sleep, she allowed herself this moment of quiet contentment. Maybe she didn't have all the answers. Maybe the future was uncertain. But for now, she wasn't running from it anymore. Life often leads us down unexpected paths, testing the boundaries of our emotions, desires, and choices. In moments of confusion or longing, it's crucial to pause and reflect on what truly fulfills us rather than acting on fleeting emotions. Communication is key, whether with a partner, family, or even yourself. Loneliness can make us seek comfort in unconventional places, but finding clarity in your emotions before making life-altering decisions is essential. Remember, passion without purpose can lead to regret. Be honest with yourself about what you truly want and ensure your choices align with your values and long-term happiness.